In this video, we're going to take a look at a subscriber's model and try to help out with creating some custom geometry in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and a little while back we did a series where we did some modeling of an RC jet. It was based on the Rebel Max, this turbine-powered jet, and we just looked at creating some general shapes. Well, the subscriber that asked me about helping to create that shape has continued to model it, and there are a couple things that we want to go back and take a look at. So far, he's done a great job at modeling this thing, and the next step is going to be figuring out how to create that intake shape where the intake rolls into the rest of the fuselage. Now, the way that this thing has been modeled, there are a bunch of different solid bodies, and these solid bodies represent different areas where we want those features. Now, this is not necessarily a conventional way of modeling something like this. It really depends on how you're going to manufacture it. So in this case, if it's going to be 3D printed in a bunch of sections, then likely you would break it up into those smaller sections, and that's kind of what's been done here. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this intake area and figure out how we can roll this thing back. Just as sort of a quick reminder of what we're working on here, again, this is a product that you can buy, you can purchase this jet, and the user was just really interested in being able to model this and figure out how, how to do that on their own. So what we're doing is we're taking a look at this intake area, which the canopy or the cockpit area is removable. It comes off, and the outside portion of that intake goes with it. And then when you look at the intake portion of it, this bottom edge of the fuselage stays at the same width, and then it sort of starts to blend in. The top stays the same, but the bottom, again, sort of blends in. So as we look at some of these different images, we can get an idea of how this thing actually looks. Here's one with the top off. You can see that it starts to blend back, and again, that upper edge is sort of staying with the rest of the cockpit. So again, this can be kind of tricky. It really is going to depend, again, on how you're going to manufacture something like this. Of course, if you had one just in front of you, that would be much easier to see these shapes. But if we're just looking at pictures, it can be kind of hard to get a good idea of how these things work. So here you can see that it's starting to cut back in right here, but that edge right just below the cockpit area, that is sort of matching that shape here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at possibly how we can make that happen. So again, this model has been broken up into a bunch of different pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide some of these. I'm going to find in the browser and just go ahead and hide some of these pieces that we don't really need. The main one that we do need is going to be the intake, which I believe is I2 in this model. And no, I'm not going to be providing this model. This is obviously something that somebody has worked quite a bit of time on, so this is not mine to share. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus our attention on how we would go about getting these shapes. So once again, this has been created in a couple of different solid bodies. We've got this lower portion of the fuselage, and then we've got this body for the intake. Now, to make this a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is just change the color of that. So I'm just going to go into plastics, and I am going to find a plastic. Let's go ahead and just make it red so it's easier to see, and I'll make the bottom green. If you're red-green colorblind, sorry, that's just going to look like one color to you, but this will help us identify the two different bodies a little bit easier. So again, what we want to do is we want to sort of keep this upper edge where it is, and then we want to blend this lower edge away. Now this becomes a little tricky because of this curve here. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be splitting this body up a little bit more so we can focus on individual areas of it. So from the right hand side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a sketch. And the sketch, just pick the right plane. We're going to use P to project. And I'm just going to find where that curve starts right there. And then I'm going to use my line tool, which is L on the keyboard. And I just want to bring a line down through the model. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time dimensioning everything. Generally, I would. But in this case, I don't want to spend the time dimensioning everything because it's just going to take more time for us to go through. So now that I have that sketch, I'm going to do a split body. We could do a split face, but split body in this case will give me two individual bodies that I can work with. Now, the green portion I don't actually really need to see. All I really need is the red portion because it has all the edges that I'm concerned with. keeping in mind that we're starting at this front edge, we're carrying along this red edge up to here, and then we're going to sort of blend into the bottom. Now, in order to sort of do this, there are a couple of ways that we can approach it. One way is we can go into our surface tools, and whichever faces I want to replace with something else, I can keep this body and I can start deleting things away from it. So for example, these outside faces I'm not going to need. I can select and hit delete, and it's going to remove those. Now this back portion right here, this is something that we're going to come back to. So I'm just going to put a little note, come back to, so that way I remember exactly which body it is. And this one here is going to be the separate surface body here that's at the very bottom of this. Also note that to clean this up a little bit, there are a bunch of different bodies in here. I'm going to right click and actually I need to create a group first. I'm going to right click at the very top and I'm going to create a new group. I'm just going to call it bodies. These are bodies that maybe we're not using right now, and I can just go ahead and put those, right click and move to group. I need to select the group, so we just go back up to the top of the model browser and select the bodies group. We're going to go ahead and put them all in there and just clean up the bodies folder a little bit so we don't have to scroll up and down. Again, not necessarily required, but if you got a bunch of extra bodies you're keeping around, that can be kind of helpful. All right, so now we're working with this as a surface, not strictly required, but one of the reasons I like to do this is because it lets me see this bottom face without having to worry about the outside. We know that we're going to keep this upper edge all the way to here, and we know that we're starting from this front edge here. Now, in reality, when we go to build our surface, what we're going to want to do is bring back that fuselage, that F1, and we're going to want to use the edge of this. So we can do an offset. It's not strictly required, but we can do an offset. I'm going to turn off chain selection, and I want to just bring the outside of this, this fuselage here. And that allows me to have the edge that I need. So for example, I can get rid of this face now if I want to, and I can use that edge to drive the tangency. Where this is going to get a little bit tricky, or where this could be problematic, is the fact that this face has an edge in between it, which means that any surfaces we create going back are going to have those edges as well. So when we get to that point, we'll have to think about how we want to do it. So a couple of different ways that we can approach this. We can decide to loft from a start to an end, and a lot of times that'll give you that nice smooth transition. Sometimes you might find that the loft control isn't quite what you want, and you might want to go in and actually build it out a little bit differently, and you can certainly do that. We could also do this with other surfacing tools. We can sweep from front to back, and that is something we can do. We can also create a form. Now, forms are something obviously we cover quite a bit on this channel, and it is a great way to model things because you don't have to spend all the time to create the sketches and to build things out. You can just go in and start to create those shapes. So any of those options are perfectly fine. I know when we did this, we talked a lot about surfaces, we did some forms, and we did just explore different ways to do it. If you want to use a form body, then you're going to want to use the match tool, which will let you match your form to the edges of a surface or a solid. So for example, if I create a plane, and I'm not going to go through the entire process here, but if I create a plane, and I just move this entire thing over to where it sort of fits. I'm going to go ahead and pull this over, maybe rotate it, maybe scale it out. And let's just go ahead and let's just get it close. I'm going to go ahead and just bring this edge down, pull that forward, scale it down. And what we can do is we can go to modify and match. This is a tool that we don't generally use very often, but I'm going to take that edge and match it with this edge. Now you want to make sure you turn off tangent chain. That will let you select the edges where you want to match it. We can also turn on the associative match. This is something we've talked about before, which means if you change the underlying surface back in the design, then the forms can update with it. We can also turn on tolerances. It's not really needed in this case, but that will let us take these upper edges and take these different edges where we want to match the underlying surface, and we can make those match. And then we can come in and we can manipulate the rest of this shape, right? So we can figure out how we want that intake to look. We can get the shape relatively close. And then once again, we can use match. So again, I'm not going to go through the entire process for this, but it is a great way for us to build out that surface. And you can see very quickly and easily, we can build something that is relatively close. The back edge we wouldn't want to match because the intake rolls in quite a bit, and we could spend more time working on that shape. But again, not going to go down it for this example. Just wanted to give you a sort of a quick overview of how you could do that. So now we're going to get on to making the rest of the shape. So remember the original sort of intake body has this bump on the backside, and that's how it actually transitions into the fuselage of the jet, the RC jet. So we're going to have to build past this back section. However, we know that it's going to intersect this portion, and we know that it's going to intersect this upper portion. It just happens to roll inward and then go up. So the way that I want to do this is I'm going to start by going to modify and unstitch. I'm going to unstitch this entire thing. Now the reason I want to do that is because this gives me these individual surfaces. When you use a tool like trim or split bodies or split faces, a lot of times when it extends out, it'll end up splitting the top and the bottom sections, and I want to make sure that I preserve those. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus first on the bottom section. So once again, remember that this bottom edge we're going to use. So this bottom edge doesn't really have to change much. However, we are going to be cutting in to this back face. So let's hide this front piece here. Let's find which one it is. And then let's look at this by sketching on the front. And I'm going to select that entire face and hit P on the keyboard to project. Once again, you can go to your Create, Project Include and find it here, but just hitting P on the keyboard is much quicker. So now this is the portion where it starts to roll into the fuselage. It's going to start to basically make its transition. So what I want to do from here is I want to figure out what that looks like. And to me, I'm just going to take a straight line. I'm going to find out about how far in I want to go. At this point, probably about 2/3 of the way from the inside edge. And I am going to just sort of bring that up and in. But remember, we are still attaching to this edge here. So you need to think about how you want that transition to happen. So I'm going to come sort of up and then over here. I'm also going to draw a line from here to here. And then I'm going to try to just apply some fillets between these just to make it nice and rounded. And those can be larger or smaller depending on what you need. And then I'm going to finish the sketch. So now I can use this as a trim tool, and I can get rid of just that little piece there. And the reason that I want to do that is, again, it's because that's where I need my new surface to terminate. So I need to find where that sketch is, and then I'll just hide the sketch folder for now. So now if we bring back some of our other surfaces, we still are at the top and the bottom, and we still have this front edge. So theoretically, we could go in and we could try to loft this. So for loft, we're going to go from these front two edges, and we're going to go to the back four edges. Now, they're four edges because we added a couple straight lines and a couple fillets. And you'll notice that this portion right here is not going to work because it's not that short edge that we want. So it's going to give us a problem. The way that we can get around that is by stitching these back together. So if I stitch those back together, it'll make that little short line work. So let's try this one more time. So we're going to go from a loft from the entire front edge to this entire back edge. So once we get here, notice that it's breaking these up. Now I have three profiles. Now when this happens, this means that there's possibly a small gap, and when we try to get rid of that, you'll notice that it changed to a completely different profile once we got here. So sometimes you need to make sure that you are still seeing only two profiles here. That's going to be very important. And then for guides, we're going to try to use these upper sections, and we're going to add another guide rail at the bottom. And there we go. So that makes a nice, good transition surface. I didn't really have to do much. I didn't really worry about tangency on the front, but that gives us that nice surface that we want to see. And this is going to be this new body 92. So I'm going to hide all this other stuff. I'm going to go back and find my fuselage, which I believe was F1, find the canopy or the cockpit, and you can see that now we've got that surface that is blending from the front to the back. And if I use Control and 4, you'll notice that it looks okay. It's not perfect. It's not perfect because we're not really driving tangency here. So that is something that we can work on, but overall the shape looks pretty good. Now, a couple ways that we can do this is we could go back and once again, what we could do is we could use that front edge, that copy of that body that we created. We could use that for the front edge of our loft, and that would be perfectly fine. We could also trim the surface and then blend it however we want. So let's go ahead and edit this. And for profile 1, I'm going to hit X. And this time for profile 1, I'm going to try to use those two edges. And now I can drive the tangency. And what that allows us to do is maintain tangency. You can see that we've got this sort of edge here that's carried on. We're going to say OK. And Control and 4 again to hide the edges. And now you can see that that blends quite a bit better. So now we're driving the tangency off the front, even though our surface starts there. You can't really tell when you hide the edges. And it transitions very nicely into that corner, and it transitions nicely down here. Now, obviously, all of this is driven off the fact that we created a sketch to trim that back piece. Now, creating that sketch to trim the back piece was just whatever shape I felt like we would see on this jet. That's not to say that that's the perfect shape, but that's kind of what we had to work with. The next step of this is to figure out how that's going to transition to the other side. So in order to do that, I'm going to mirror. I'm going to take this body and I'm just going to mirror it across the midplane. And you can see now we've got a copy on the other side. Now, before I really try to get into making a bunch of sketches and trying a bunch of different things, I'm just going to simply see if I can loft from one to the other and drive this based on curvature or based on tangency. Now, in some cases, curvature will really fight you. A lot of times tangency will work, but you will need to play around potentially with the direction. So let's see here. That one seems to be okay. If I pull this out a little bit, you can kind of see that it's going in the wrong direction. Sometimes when you select these, you will get the option to flip. I'm going to change these to aligned edges for both of them and just take a look at our results. So you can see it's kind of going crazy in the middle. But again, sometimes you do get a flipped option. You can play around with the settings and you can see if you can get it to work. In this case, it doesn't seem like it's going to work, but before I give up, I'm going to try to put a negative in front of these tangency weight numbers. I'm going to go to profile 2, put a negative there, and you can see that it is going the wrong direction. So it doesn't quite have enough for me to get there. The good news is that we can start a new sketch. And I'm going to just select a plane. Doesn't really matter what plane we select. And I'm going to use a 3D sketch. So for a 3D sketch, I'm going to create a spline that goes from here. I'm just going to put a midpoint in for now to here. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to try to drive this off of tangency with this edge and off of tangency with this edge. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to take that point and I'm going to delete it. So when I do that, what I get is where the sort of path of least resistance is. The last step to this is the weight of these handles, and when we're doing this in 3D, we don't really have quite the same control that we normally would. You could do this by creating projected edges. It's just going to take a bit more time. So I'm going to finish the sketch with just that. I'm going to go back to my loft and say loft from here to here. This time I'm going to add a guide rail, and I'm going to drive this off of tangency. So once again, I'm going to try it at tangency, see if we can get it using my aligned edges or aligned to surface option, see if we can get there. And you can see that it's still trying to fail because what's actually happening is it's sort of rolling over here. So this tells me that that isn't going to work. The next thing that I could try is I'm going to go ahead and delete that sketch. So just select it in the timeline, delete it. The other thing that we could try is we could figure out where we want this to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project these edges. I'm going to use a line and just sort of come out straight here. I'm going to turn off my 3D sketch because I don't want to be doing this in 3D. So we figure out where we want this to go, and we know that we want the shape to sort of transition to not have these little lips on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of draw this line. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to turn this one into construction. And then from our surface tools, we're going to extrude this. Now, the main reason that we're extruding this is just to give us a tangency reference. You could also do it with direction by selecting the sketch, but I like to use these surfaces, just kind of my own preference. So we'll go from here to here. And now we can drive tangency off of that. We might need to flip the direction, and you can see that seems to be okay. Tangency here. And then what we're getting is that shape is sort of rolling away. Now, we want to make sure, again, that we think about these aligned edges and free edges. What ends up happening is the free edge will just go in whatever direction the curvature is. If we use aligned edge, it's going to align to the current edges of the surface that we're using. So you can see here that it's driving it to be a much better shape. Now, this shape here that we use to cut out is probably more pronounced than it needs to be. But again, this is just an example of how you can do this. You have to pick your own geometry. And then what I can do from here is just mirror this body to the other side. Again, using that mirror plane. And we can stitch all these together. So grab that back one, and this one here. And now we've got sort of this intake shape. So once again, I'm going to bring back the fuselage, and I want to bring back the canopy or cockpit. And you can see now we're getting that sort of rolled in shape that we would expect to see here. Now, the last bit of this is how we can turn that back into a solid body, because at this point, it's just a surface. And we do have these other surfaces that we did create. So if we can find like this upper surface here, let's go ahead and find that front piece. Let's find the inside piece. So this last bit right there is that. And what we want to do is we want to mirror those to the other side. So we're going to mirror all of these different little surface bodies. We're going to mirror them across that midplane. When we select join, what ends up happening is Fusion is going to stitch those together. And you can see it even did a really nice job of getting rid of that mid seam. And from here, what we want to do is we want to stitch that with these other pieces. And when I do that, I have to remember that I accidentally filled in this back section here. So I'm going to hit delete on the keyboard to get rid of that. And then use my patch tool to sort of fill in this upper section. Because this is fairly flat, I'm not really concerned with driving it off tangency. On the bottom, I'm going to repeat that. You notice that this time it's using this edge, so that means I didn't stitch that together properly. Let me go ahead and hide this and make sure I don't have a copy of it. All right, so let's stitch all these together. We'll grab that one as well. That leaves me just this bottom open section here. So once again, we're going to create this on this back edge. So we want to find whichever edge this one is right here. So keep working your way through. And we want to drive tangency off of just that back edge. So I'm going to make sure all the other ones are connected. Then I'm going to say tangent there, and we'll stitch them together. And when I do this, it creates a closed volume, and it should theoretically turn this into a solid. Now you'll notice that it's still listed as a surface here. Now if I try to stitch it again, you can see that that front edge was missing. I never selected it, so I just needed to add that little piece. And now we've got a solid volume that we could do things like shell it out or add other details to it that are required. All right, so now we've got this, I'm going to just call this intake. I have this intake 2 to come back to. So this was that back original piece. And the reason I left that there just to come back to is because I wanted to see how it intersected with the cockpit. And everything looks fine. That's actually the shape that I believe that we have. So the fuselage, and then I could turn on some of the rest of the pieces just to make sure that everything looked okay. So I think that that is a pretty good result relative to what, what the real thing looks like. So that's probably where I'm going to stop it from here. But if you have any questions on this, I know I wasn't able to provide the model, but hopefully that gave you a few different insights on how you can approach something like this with both forms and surface tools. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.